Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and today I watched 1997's Event Horizon. Boy, where do we start with this one? Event Horizon is a commercial flop of a science fiction horror film. That still has a bit of a cult following and has for quite some time, but still is, I think, largely forgotten. It is a film that's been recommended to me or noted by various people whose opinions I respect numerous times over many years, but I've just never gotten around to watching it. What with it being science fiction horror, you know, as I've expressed previously, horror is not necessarily my bag, especially when it comes to either. There's some specific things I particularly don't like in the horror genre, especially when it comes to more recent horror that is so reliant on shock value more so than true mentally what's the word I'm looking for, the type of things that make you think and sort of horrify you in an existential way rather than a just shock and disgust and surprise kind of way. I think that's one of the reasons it took me so long to get to this one. But at this point, I think I'm definitely glad I watched it. It's not a fantastic film. It definitely has some substantial flaws. But I'm glad to have finally watched it because I think it does belong in the larger library of science fiction cinema knowledge that anyone trying to sort of, no pun intended, as I was realizing what I was about to say, expand their horizons cinematically. This one is going to be a little bit hard to talk about without spoilers, not because of the plot itself, but because of themes and comparisons to other films that I think I'd like to make. So I'm just going to put a sort of blanket warning on this one that I'm going to try to avoid talking about the plot directly, but if you watch this entire video, I'm probably pretty likely to spoil some of the surprise and the engagement you may have on a first viewing if you haven't seen this already. So if you can spare, 95 minutes, I think. It's relatively, 96 minutes, yeah. It's relatively short, doesn't wholly overstay its welcome, and despite its flaws, I think is a worthwhile viewing. But that's sort of where I'm gonna cut it, and then again, I'm gonna try and keep it limited in the spoilers, but proceed with your own. Consider your caution in the spoilers territory there. So, Event Horizon is shockingly good in the first 30 minutes, to the point where I was actively thinking in my head, boy, this is fantastic, to the point of being better, on par with or better than a lot of the science fiction, highly lauded science fiction that preceded it. It unfortunately devolves as the film goes on. There's a lot of comparisons I made in my head over the course of watching this. Some of it's to rather obvious comparisons, things like Alien and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Also things like Dune and even The Shining. But it's I don't know. It never sort of lands on its feet, which is very unfortunate because I suspect there was a better film out there, and unfortunately, this film is rather legendary for being left on the cutting room floor. This is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, and this was fairly early in his cinematic career. He is known for a variety of different films, most notably possibly the Resident Evil films, which I haven't watched in some years, but actually have plans to rewatch one of them tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that and hoping that it holds up as well as I think it does. Hope it does. It's not a good film, but it's entertaining. Paul W.S. Anderson is not a particularly great filmmaker, but he makes entertaining schlock that usually is not particularly offensive. And I actually didn't realize that this is just a sheer coincidence that this was a Paul W.S. Anderson film. But it sort of makes sense. That said, there are some signs of a Paul W.S. Anderson film that I would expect from him and did not see here. And I don't know that if that's because it's earlier in his career than the films that would make him more famous, or what exactly it is. Maybe it was just the production company, the people meddling who really screwed this up. But evidently, this film is rather legendary for being absolutely chopped to pieces and having, I think, 6 weeks to edit the film, which is fucking bonkers. But yeah, evidently that's what happened. I have heard stories of people who worked on the film once upon a time saying that they thought there was a better film in there. Unfortunately, it seems that we will never see it because it's not just that it was cut down by the studio, it's that the original footage was actually lost. It was not stored properly, or it was literally lost, and there's no way of salvaging it. So that is unfortunate. The film has promise. And like I said, the first 30 minutes really nail a lot of things I would hope from a science fiction film. Now I could, I don't remember if I've talked about this before. I could go on a multi-hour discussion / tirade / monologue about what is and isn't science fiction, and why the distinction of science fiction is somewhat important, if only because just slapping the label science fiction on anything with spaceships in the future is a really good way to devalue the meaning of the term, and that science fiction means a particular thing, and that's not meant to be exclusionary. It's just words should mean things, not just be sort of blanket nothing generalizations. But this does fall directly into sort of what I would consider more hardcore science fiction, especially in that early period. It does a lot of the similar sorts of beats as you would get in something like Alien, and it does them quite well. I really want to emphasize that. It does them shockingly well. The crew of the ship are maybe not full characters, but none of them are like really serious cliches. There are some aspects of this that are actually done even better, I would say, than Alien, and Alien is one of my favorite films. Where like it manages to avoid some of the pitfalls of both the science fiction and horror genres. The in particular the I mean most of the characters not really very cliche, even if they're not particularly deep. The women are not sexual objects or treated as less competent or like that. I think there might be one singular barely notable offhand line of suggesting that one of the women is not as strong as one of the men, and that's literally the only thing I can think of, and it's sort of something I'm tuned into. So and none of them are really treated as sexual objects at any point. So points there, especially from Paul W.S. Anderson, who does not have the greatest track record of not cinematically ogling women. So yeah, the first bit of this, as they are setting off on the journey, is particularly well done. Unfortunately, it proceeds to devolve a bit, and it does it somewhat slowly until by the end it really falls to the pieces, to the point where like I think it was supposed to be deathly serious at the end, and in the last 15 minutes there was more than one occasion where I was just laughing in the face of the film because it was so absurd. The editing as well, unsurprisingly from the alleged history of the film, progressively devolves, where again those first 30 minutes are almost impeccable, and then it gets progressively worse and worse and worse, and those last 15 minutes are just atrocious. Could have thrown it at the raw footage at a film student, and they would have almost assuredly done a better job than what came out in the final edit. That said, it's not without merit. It's just troubling and saddening that it shook out the way it was. A lot of what I consider to be important about the idea of science fiction is sort of this idea of a humanity stretched to its limits. Again, I'm going to try and not delve too much into my thoughts on science fiction as a whole genre, but humanity stretched to its limits, often in, far off space in the far-flung future, where the limits of human psychology and mental fortitude and sociality are all really tested. And I think that's a fascinating thing, not only in film, but in other media as well, especially novels and novellas where science fiction really got its start. And this film generally sticks or attempts to stick with that sort of concept. However, it never delves into the level of exploration that I really wanted it to hit upon. The initial chunk of the film, the first act, really sets it up as though it's going to go there. It's well paced, it's well shot. There is a substantial amount of exposition, but it's not delivered in a way that feels unreasonable or particularly egregious. I think it's perfectly fine, and I think it could be limited a little bit, but there's only so much you can cut out without, just confusing the audience. Apparently, this film confuses some people, and I don't understand that. It seems pretty cut and dry to me, but I digress. So, with this setup that really points towards a more existential consideration and some chunks of the second act that are more focused on that sort of existential examination and the limits of human psychology and these sort of issues that are going on the ship, and how much of it is the how much of it is reality and how much of it is, in individuals' heads, and what the external factors and internal and external factors are on each individual and how they experience what's going on around them, is something I deeply enjoy. Unfortunately, those second act explorations are sparing and mostly used for really just pushing the horror aspect of the film. And it's where the sort of cliche horror stuff kicks into high gear in terms of stuff I really don't like, both cinematically and personally. Cinematically, it uses a not insubstantial amount of jump scares. They're hardly the most egregious I've ever seen. They're not completely unearned, but they're definitely jump scares, and I don't think they serve the movie all that well. Especially when you're dealing with a more psychological horror. I think the more you let the horror marinate, the better it is. If you constantly sort of psychologically pay off the audience's tension by breaking it with jump scares or other sudden bits of horror, that really breaks up the tension in a way that overall damages the power of the narrative or the power of whatever's been sort of building. So that's really a shame. But on top of that, it doesn't really explore those things. When the characters begin to get more and more distressed for a variety of reasons about the situation that they're in, they don't do much more than finally admit it to each other. It doesn't explore why why these things are happening, how much of it is them, what they're doing to combat it personally. It falls more and more into horror tropes and almost a more psychological version of the idea of like the the slasher victim who never leaves the house, right? Like the front door was open and they just didn't leave. Not that's maybe not the best analogy, but it seems pertinent in terms of just if you guys talked more or something like that, then like some of this would be more believable and also probably go a different sort of way. Particularly towards the end, it really seems to ramp into the sort of slashery, more high action type of horror that is particularly uninteresting to me. There's also some aspects where they really use some grotesque gore moments. Not that they are insanely egregious, just that they're not that well used and seem to be sort of more for the shock value than for the actual pushing of the narrative. That said, structurally speaking, I can absolutely see a movie where those scenes and events are used to much greater effect when recontextualized inside the more psychological narrative that the beginning of the film seems to want to tell. When you have characters that are grappling with horrific things, there's a lot that can be explored in human psychology with very little sort of setup. The human mind is a surprisingly fragile thing, and the variety of reactions and the personality traits and things that can expand out of certain traumatic events are interesting and not that difficult to explore, but also require a level of subtlety and nuance that the second and third acts of this film are very seriously lacking. That much is for sure. But that said, I mean, on the whole, it doesn't fall apart completely. It's still got merits, and like I said at the beginning of of this video, I still think it's definitely deserving of a watch if this is sort of your cup of tea or your cinematic area. Whether you like horror films or psychological, more psychological driven horror films, or you like hard sci-fi, especially the likes of, the writers of the, sort of boom of sci-fi, people like Asimov and things like that, then I think this will be sort of up your alley, even if it is deeply flawed and unfortunately cut to pieces. There's other connections I sort of want to make as well. One of them being The Matrix, if only because not only visually does it have a lot of similar elements to The Matrix, which is 2 years after this, obviously, but also having Lawrence Fishburne as a main character is sort of undeniably a connection, to the point that I wonder whether the Wachowskis saw this film and cast Lawrence Fishburne on that basis. He doesn't play, Morpheus in this film. He's not even particularly close to that. But there's the Wachowskis have talked many times about their cinematic influences, and as much as I have my personal opinions about all of the Matrix films, including the first one, which I do not praise nearly as highly as most people, it would not surprise me in the least if they saw this and took some things from it. So there's a point there. I'm also going to make the connection to another film that has a special place in my heart, despite its flaws, and also another film that very few people have seen, and that's 2007's Sunshine, which was a film I was shown many years ago by a good long-term friend of mine, and I like to sing its praises every once in a while, although I haven't watched it in some years, so I should probably also rewatch that one and make sure it's not crap. But I remember it well enough, and I've seen it enough times that I feel pretty comfortable saying you should watch that one as well. I think between Sunshine and Event Horizon, Sunshine's probably the better film, but it also had 10 more years of cinema to build upon, or be its foundation. So take that for what you will. Yeah, on the whole, I didn't hate this film. I didn't love it either. I think I like it. I only finished it a little while ago, and actually, after this, well, we'll see. What time is it? I may be watching 3 films today. Maybe I'll only watch 2 and then do another thing. Anyway, I've got 3 films lined up, of which, Jesus, I hope this is the first one I'm going to post, because otherwise this is all going to be screwed up. I've got 3 films in mind that are somewhat related. Don't read too much into that. But I got 3 films that I think are going to go up in sequence, probably in the order that I watched them. This being the first one. I should stop saying that in case it's not. Fuck. That have some connections that I want to explore. The one other thing I wanted to mention about this film is that the connection to Warhammer 40K, which is To my knowledge, entirely unintentional, but does always tickle me a little when somebody draws from Warhammer and makes connections that seem to be in line with Warhammer. Uh, Warhammer 40K is a... Ooh, I was about to say it's a passion of mine. It's not. I find I find 40K fascinating as a property and as a universe. And there are a number of structural connections between this and 40K that I find really fascinating. Um, Now I'm regretting bringing this up because I basically can't talk about them without spoiling a substantial chunk of the film. But if you're familiar with some of the like overarching world building of 40K and watch this, I think they should be relatively obvious. And I know that some fans have mentioned it in that context as sort of an unofficial Warhammer 40K prequel. That's really, pressing it, but I do enjoy the sort of narrative similarities nonetheless. I'm trying to think, do I have anything else to talk about with this? I'm kind of excited about it. It sort of I was a little surprised at what the film turned out to be in general. So sort of coming off of it is a little bit weird, a little bit manic. But anyway, I think that basically covers what I wanted to say. So thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I will see you guys next time.